Have you ever felt that something very important was missing from the stories told, that the words spoken weren't all that was meant to be conveyed? Millions of people around the world know the Gospels, listen to the teachings of Jesus, and follow traditions that have persisted for 2 millennia. But what if there was something that was never truly revealed? A teaching so transformative, so intimate, that it was deliberately reserved for only 3 people. A hidden spiritual code, intended not for the masses, but for those who were ready to listen to it with an awakened heart. The existence of this secret knowledge is not just an esoteric hypothesis. It throbs between the lines of the oldest texts and resonates in the forgotten words of silenced masters. At the heart of this enigma lies the clear distinction Jesus made between what he said to the public and what he whispered to those closest to him. While the crowds received parables, often enigmatic metaphors, his closest disciples had access to more direct truths, yet shrouded in silence. It is Jesus himself who says, in the Gospels, that to you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom, but to those outside, everything is said in parables. But what were these mysteries? And why not reveal them openly? The answer may lie in a type of wisdom that cannot be explained in words, only lived, and therefore could only be transmitted through intimate contact, through spiritual communion between master and disciple. In the midst of history, 3 names emerge with unique prominence: Mary Magdalene, John, and Thomas. This is not about modern interpretations or speculative fictions, but about traces found in the ancient texts themselves, including those that were excluded from the official Bible. They appear not as ordinary followers, but as receptacles of something deeper. Each represents a different aspect of spiritual consciousness: transformative love, inner vision, and silent understanding. Together, they form a triangle of sacred transmission that survived on the fringes of religious orthodoxy, protected by the shadows of time. The existence of this secret code touches a sensitive point of the Christian faith: the notion that the highest truth was not meant for everyone. For many, this idea might seem elitist or even heretical. However, it's not something new. Since ancient times, spiritual traditions from around the world have recognized that there are layers of knowledge, steps that can only be reached when the soul is ready. Just like the inner teachings of Buddhism, Sufism within Islam, or Kabbalah in Judaism, Christianity too had its esoteric face. And it is precisely this face that time tried to hide, but is now beginning to emerge again. There are indications, albeit scattered, that Jesus was a master with full command of universal spiritual laws. His miracles, his gestures, and his words suggest a knowledge that transcends the boundaries of religion. The spiritual code would then not be a set of rules, but a frequency of perception, a way of seeing the world and oneself with the vision of unity and eternity. Whoever accessed this code would not only understand the kingdom of heaven, but they would live it here and now. And perhaps, for this reason, it was too dangerous to be shared with everyone, as it required inner maturity and a break from the control systems of the time. Amidst ecclesiastical tradition, this dimension was systematically silenced. The councils that defined the canonical Gospels left out dozens of texts that presented a more internalized and symbolic vision of spirituality. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, begins with a clear promise: whoever finds the meaning of these words will not experience death. This is not just any metaphor. It is the expression of a transformative truth, pointing towards the transcendence of the egoic identity and the realization of the divine being within each one. But this promise could only be understood by those willing to lose everything they knew, and this was dangerous for any power structure. Silence, then, becomes a tool for protection and depth. Jesus used silence intentionally, not as absence, but as a dense presence. He knew that there are truths that, when spoken, lose their potency. By keeping certain revelations within a restricted circle, he preserved the power of the mystery, inviting inner search, personal immersion. It was not a secret kept out of vanity, but out of wisdom. Some keys only make sense when the heart is ready to turn them, and this preparation does not come from doctrine, but from transformation. To understand the code, one must first accept that not everything has been revealed, and that silence itself is a language. The Eastern traditions had already warned us. The true master does not respond with words, but with presence. Jesus, as an initiate in various ancient wisdoms, understood that enlightenment is not something that is taught, but something that is awakened. This completely changes our relationship with the sacred texts. Instead of seeking rational answers in them, we begin to read them with the Spirit, and each sentence becomes a mirror of our soul in the process of remembering. The three chosen were not appointed by merit, but by harmony. Maria, João, and Tome did not have the credentials expected by tradition. They were not religious leaders, nor figures of social prestige. They were sensitive, attentive, and above all, silent. They were open to that which cannot be explained. It is at this point that the code begins to reveal its true nature. It is not hidden content, but a hidden way of seeing. And for this very reason, it could never be publicly announced. For only those who see with the eyes of the Spirit can decipher it. History treated them in distinct ways. Maria was silenced and reduced to stigmas. John was canonized and placed on a pedestal. Thomas was called incredulous for doubting the dogma. But they all carried parts of the same revelation. In their experiences, there are echoes of something much larger, a living reality that overflowed from the words of Jesus, but that could only be lived in the intimacy of the self. And perhaps, by looking again at their trajectories with eyes free of prejudice, we might rediscover what was lost, not in old pages, but within ourselves. The inevitable question that remains is, why was all of this hidden? And even more so, is it still possible to access this code today? Do we possess the same spark that pulsed in Mary, John, and Thomas? And if so, what prevents us from awakening it? These are the questions that will guide our journey from here on out. What is yet to come is not merely a historical exposition, but a profound invitation to remember. Because perhaps the greatest secret of all is that this code was never lost, just forgotten. At the heart of the mystery lies a silent choice. Jesus, master of love and truth, walked among 12 disciples, preached to crowds, and dialogued with scribes and Pharisees. Yet, he chose to entrust the most subtle essence of his wisdom to only 3 people. There was no public proclamation of this choice, no recorded rituals, only fragments, silences, and nuances. The inevitable question arises like a persistent whisper. Why Mary Magdalene, John, and Thomas? What was in them that made them worthy of receiving what was hidden from the others? The answer is not in their words, but in the way they absorbed what was left unsaid. Mary Magdalene is perhaps the most controversial and enigmatic figure among the disciples. For centuries, she was reduced to stereotypes, transformed now into a prostitute, now into a repentant sinner, erasing her deep identity as a disciple and teacher. However, the apocryphal Gospels and Gnostic texts reveal her as someone whose connection with Jesus went beyond words. In the Gospel of Mary, for example, she receives visions that confuse and even irritate the other disciples. Peter directly questions her. "You who were chosen by him, tell us the words of the Savior that you know, but we do not." This phrase in itself already subverts the entire traditional narrative. She knew something that the others did not. John, the beloved disciple, is another pillar of this sacred triangle. His gospel is unique among the 4 canonical ones. It does not begin with genealogies or birth narratives, but with the Logos, the Word, the creative Word. Instead of merely narrating events, he delves into the symbolic dimension of being. John describes signs instead of miracles, uses images of light, darkness, water, and spiritual rebirth. He is not a chronicler, he is a visionary. It is no coincidence that he is attributed the authorship of Revelation, one of the most symbolic and dense texts of the Christian tradition. John understood silence as a bridge between worlds. He did not seek to explain, but to evoke the truth in each awakened soul. Thomas, in turn, is unjustly remembered only for his disbelief, but there is something deeply honest and spiritual about his doubt. He did not accept ready-made dogmas. He needed to touch, feel, live for himself. It is precisely this attitude that connects him to the core of the hidden teaching. The kingdom is not elsewhere. but within you. His gospel is radical. There is no mention of crucifixion or resurrection as external events. Instead, he offers a series of direct, unadorned sayings that point to the awakening of consciousness. When saying, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will be like me," Jesus, according to Thomas, does not proclaim superiority, but divine equality, a scandal for any religious power structure. These three were not leaders in the institutional sense. They did not found churches. They did not seek authority. But they carried an inner seed. They understood that transformation does not occur through blind obedience, but through inner awakening. And for this reason, they received what others could not sustain. Peter was impulsive, James was rigid, Judas was political, each with their own role. But Mary, John, and Thomas were tuned into a different frequency. They did not just listen to Jesus, they understood him. The choice of the three bears similarities with other spiritual traditions. In Sufism, the master chooses disciples not for their apparent merits, but for their capacity for internal silence. In Zen, the koan is only given to the monk ready to break with logical thinking. In Hinduism, the transmission of the secret mantra only occurs when the disciple reaches a certain spiritual maturity. The pattern repeats. There is a subtle, invisible transmission that requires more than faith. It demands a transformation of consciousness. Mary, John, and Thomas represented this. It is interesting to note that Jesus never denied teachings to anyone, but he often said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." That is, not everyone was ready to understand what was being said. The depth of a message is not only in what is spoken, but in who listens. Therefore, Jesus' spiritual code could not be written nor memorized, only revealed from within. Those three had ears that knew how to listen beyond words. Furthermore, there is a clear discomfort among the other disciples in the ancient records due to this special intimacy. On more than one occasion, Peter becomes irritated with Mary. He even questions whether Jesus would truly entrust to a woman what he did not entrust to them. Jesus' response, according to the Gospel of Mary, is cutting. "I chose her because she is worthy." Here we see the embryo of a spirituality without external hierarchies, without gender, without titles, just true connection. This was, and still is, revolutionary. What unites the three chosen ones is the inner aspect. Maria represents the intuitive and visionary feminine. John, the silent and contemplative love. Thomas, the restless reason seeking direct experience. Together, they form a human trinity, each reflecting an essential aspect of the awakening process. Perhaps the spiritual code was not revealed to them because they were special, but because they were complete. Understanding this trinity is to begin to understand the path of awakening. Looking at the oldest accounts, it's clear that it was not just about receiving teachings, but about becoming the teaching itself. Mary was not just the listener, but the revealer. John did not merely transcribe the Logos, he embodied it. Thomas not only questioned, but lived the doubt as a path to transcendence. Each of them represents an entryway to what was silenced, but never erased. And it is this legacy that begins to pulse again today, in the face of a new humanity in search of meaning. What if Jesus, in giving essence to these three, was not creating an elite, but sowing a spiritual map accessible to anyone who dared to follow from within? What if the true criterion for receiving the code was never blood, rank, or religion, but purity of intention and courage to see beyond? In that case, the code remains active and can be found where it is least expected. Perhaps by recognizing the story of these three with disarmed eyes, we may glimpse in ourselves the same spark that moved them. The invitation is out. It's time to do more than just admire these characters. We must mirror their qualities. Maria calls us to the intuition that sees beyond form. John invites us to the quietness that listens to what is not said. Thomas challenges us to abandon the comfort of inherited beliefs and seek direct contact with the sacred. They are not distant in time, they are present in the now as living archetypes. The code is not past. The code is presence. Few texts have been as underestimated and as revolutionary as the Gospel of Thomas. Discovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi in the Egyptian desert, alongside other manuscripts considered apocryphal by the official tradition, this gospel offers a radically different glimpse of Jesus. There are no birth stories, crucifixion, or resurrection. There are no miracles. What we have instead is a collection of 114 sayings, dry, direct, and often enigmatic, that reveal a master not as an external savior, but as a mirror of the inner divine. In this text, Jesus is not just the Son of God. He is the manifestation of the awakening that dwells within us all. Right from the first lines, Thomas offers us a bold promise. The Gospel begins with a sentence that already carries a tone of mystery and spiritual urgency. These are the secret words that Jesus, the living, spoke, and that Didymus Judas Thomas wrote. Whoever finds the meaning of these words will not experience death. This is not a poetic phrase, but a precise declaration. Understanding these words is equivalent to transcending the limited human condition, overcoming the fear of death, and recognizing inner eternity. This is the code, not knowledge to be learned, but a secret to be unveiled within one's own consciousness. The sayings of Jesus and Thomas do not ask for blind faith, but demand introspection. One of the most well-known declares, "If those who lead you say to you, 'The kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. But the kingdom is within you and outside of you." Here is one of the greatest subversions in all of Western spiritual history. The kingdom is not a place, nor is it a future. It is an inner experience, a radical shift in perception that reveals unity in everything. There is no mediation. There is no dependence on dogmas or intermediaries. There is only the invitation, go within. This call to introspection is one of the most striking features of the text. Jesus in Thomas does not act as a prophet who challenges the heavens, but as a mirror of the awakened consciousness. He insists that self-knowledge is the path to the divine. Know thyself, and you will know that you are a child of the living Father. This is the essence of the esoteric teaching that spans ancient traditions, from Greek oracles to Eastern mysticism. Jesus is not presented as the one who saves from the fall, but as the one who awakens the sleeping. And it is exactly this that makes this gospel so dangerous to any power structure. It gives the center of the mystical experience back to the individual. Unlike the synoptic gospels, which portray external events and chronologies, Thomas is deeply nonlinear. It operates in a language that challenges the logical mind. The sayings often seem contradictory or circular, but it is precisely in this form that its power lies. The text does not want to inform, it wants to deconstruct, to tear down the false self, the constructed identity, to make room for the true self. In one of the sayings, Jesus says, "When you make the two one, and you make the inside like the outside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, then you will enter the kingdom." This is about an alchemy of consciousness, integrating dualities and dissolving separations. The gospel also dismantles the idea of salvation as something conditional or meritocratic. There are no threats of hell, nor heavenly rewards. There is only presence. In another saying, Jesus asserts, "The old man will not hesitate to ask a 7-day-old child about the place of life, and he will live." Here he reminds us that access to truth does not depend on age, status, intellectual wisdom, but on the purity of perception. The gaze that has not yet been corrupted by convention. This is the true gateway. Another fascinating aspect of the Gospel of Thomas is the absence of any religious structure. Jesus does not establish a church. He does not delegate priestly authority. He speaks to the individual. Enlightenment is not in the group, the ritual, or the temple. It is in reconnecting with the source within oneself. In a world saturated with spiritual intermediaries, this teaching represents radical freedom. The spiritual code does not need to be taught by someone. It needs to be awakened from within. And for this, the text itself acts as a catalyst, a series of keys that, if understood with the heart, open previously invisible doors. There is also a deeply symbolic element in the way Thomas organizes the sayings. They do not follow a logical order, which suggests that the gospel is a sort of initiatory labyrinth. Each sentence is a door. Some open immediately, others require reflection, silence, life experiences. But they all point to the same center, the return to the essential self. In a society that constantly seeks answers outside itself, Thomas is a disconcerting call to self-inquiry. Jesus, in this gospel, is not above us. He is the living reminder of what we are when we cease the illusions. Perhaps the most striking of all sayings is the one that states, "If they ask you, 'Where do you come from?' tell them, 'We come from the light, from where the light emerged from itself.'" This is a declaration of divine origin, which resonates with the concept of Atman in the Vedas, or the primordial spirit in Gnostic traditions. Jesus not only points to the divine spark in man, he claims it as origin. This is a dangerous truth because it liberates, because it challenges all notions of inherited guilt or imposed redemption, because it places the human being not as a servant, but as a living expression of the sacred. The absence of miracles in Thomas does not indicate a lack of power, but another conception of miracle, the miracle of awakened consciousness. Jesus does not perform supernatural events in this gospel. He reveals reality as it is, infinite, interconnected, alive. There is no need to walk on water when one recognizes that the ocean is within us. The true miracle is to see without veils, to see beyond forms, and that is what the gospel offers, not a story to believe, but a vision to awaken. In times when spirituality often reduces to the consumption of rituals, motivational phrases, or ideological disputes, the Gospel of Thomas is a direct challenge. It does not comfort, it deconstructs. It does not offer crutches, but invites to the solitary journey towards wholeness. Its silence between the words is as powerful as its sayings. It does not shout, it whispers. And for this reason, only those who silence within can hear it. Perhaps that's why it has been forgotten for so many centuries. Perhaps for this reason, today it is being rediscovered, because there is a hunger in the world that only silent truths can satisfy. This is not about replacing other gospels, nor creating a new doctrine. It's about recognizing that Jesus' voice was plural, and that among the official records, there are messages that still echo. Thomas does not contradict Christ. He reveals him under another light, a light that does not project but emerges from within. And it is this light that accompanies us as we continue to decipher the code, step by step, word by word, not with the mind, but with the awakened spirit. For centuries, the image of Mary Magdalene has been distorted, misrepresented, and disfigured by the winds of history. Unfairly labeled as a prostitute, transformed into a symbol of moral repentance, she was pushed to the margins of the official narrative. But behind this theological construction lies a silent and powerful truth that is gradually beginning to emerge. Mary was not a redeemed sinner, but an initiate. She was not merely a follower, but a teacher. And more than that, she was the keeper of a spiritual code that transcends religions, a knowledge that connects love, the divine feminine, and the light of awakened consciousness. The Gospel of Mary, a text found in the 19th century but only widely disseminated in the 20th century, presents a radically different portrait from the popular image. In it, Mary appears as someone who had profound visions and understood Jesus' innermost teachings in a much higher way than the other disciples. When the others were lost after the crucifixion, it is Mary who encourages them not to doubt and to keep the received truth alive. This gesture reveals authentic spiritual leadership, but the men around her resisted acknowledging it. Peter, in particular, represents the institutional voice, questioning whether Jesus would really speak such truths to a woman and not to them. This resistance is not only historical, it's symbolic. The feminine, as an intuitive, visionary, and welcoming spiritual force, has always been feared by patriarchal power structures. Mary embodied this sacred feminine, not as a counterpoint to the masculine, but as an essential complement to the totality of being. Her role as the Apostle of the Apostles, a title recognized even by important figures of the early church, was deliberately suppressed because she did not fit into the molds of dogmatic authority. She did not found institutions, but accessed states of consciousness. Your gospel does not bring miracles or commandments, it brings inner revelations. In it, Jesus tells Mary that all nature, all form, all creature exists interconnected, and that sin is not something done against a law, but the forgetting of who we are. This is the essence of the code. Humanity's fundamental mistake is having forgotten its divine origin, its inner light. The way back is not through guilt, but through remembrance. Mary does not preach moralism, she preaches awakening, and that's why her voice was silenced, not due to weakness, but because of too much strength. Your teachings echo what Eastern masters have called enlightenment, a state of unification with the whole, where the ego loses power and consciousness expands. It is significant that Mary was the first to see the resurrected Christ. This is not just a symbolic event, it's a confirmation that the first to perceive reality beyond death was the one who already saw with the eyes of the soul. While the male disciples were locked in fear, Mary went to the tomb, faced the darkness, and found the light. Tradition has hidden this gesture because it destabilizes the foundations of external authority. Mary saw because she was free inside. Many scholars suggest that there was a profound relationship between Mary and Jesus, perhaps even a conjugal one, but to reduce this connection to a physical level is a mistake. The bond between them is mystical. She was the one who understood without needing an explanation. He would call her by name, and she recognized his voice. This type of intimacy transcends the body. It is the spiritual union between the master and the disciple who became a master herself. He entrusted her not just with words, but with vibration. She received what cannot be written, only experienced. And for this reason, she became the guardian of a knowledge that never depended on temples or scriptures. Maria represents, within the spiritual code, the aspect of intuitive wisdom. If Thomas is the subtle reason that seeks, and John the contemplative love, Maria is the inner vision that recognizes. In esoteric traditions, this is symbolized by the figure of Sophia, the divine wisdom that permeates all creation. Maria and Sophia merge into archetype. She is the one who sees beyond appearance, who perceives the illusions of the world, and who walks with courage through the invisible. By restoring her image, we are not only doing historical justice, we are reclaiming a forgotten dimension of Christian spirituality. The return to integration between reason and intuition, between spirit and flesh, between heaven and earth. In the apocryphal accounts, Mary recounts profound visions, among them, the journey of the soul through realms until returning to the source. In her mystical experience, she describes how the soul must free itself from the chains of desire, ignorance, and fear. These stages are not merely symbolic, they are internal maps. They are paths that any spiritual seeker can tread if they are willing to look within. The Gospel shows us that Mary was not just a follower, but an initiate, someone who pierced the veils of the mind and saw reality through the eyes of the Spirit. Her figure becomes even more significant when we understand that the spiritual code she held was not a content, but a way of being. Mary embodied the code. She was the living expression of awakened consciousness, of the sacred feminine, of the direct connection with the divine. Therefore, her presence among the three chosen ones is so essential. Without Mary, the triangle of the code cannot hold. She is not an addition, she is the foundation. Her role is to remind us that spiritual awakening requires sensitivity, surrender, and the courage to confront our own abyss. For millennia, this wisdom was relegated to the sidelines. But history cannot contain what is true. Today, the name of Mary Magdalene is once again spoken with reverence, not as a symbol of guilt, but as an emblem of consciousness. Her gospel does not invite us to veneration, but to transformation. By recognizing the light she carried, we are invited to ignite our own. And this is, perhaps, the central point of the code. The recognition of divinity within ourselves, through the reflection of those who have already lived it. Reintegrating Mary into the Christian narrative is not just an act of justice, it is a spiritual rescue. It's acknowledging that wisdom has no gender, doesn't depend on rank, and doesn't need permission to flourish. It's affirming that the sacred feminine is an indispensable part of the soul's journey, and it's accepting that the spiritual code only reveals itself when we balance in ourselves love, discernment, and vision. Mary shows us that the secret of Jesus is not in repeating his words, but in living with the same inner freedom that he conveyed, and that she embraced. Among all the disciples who lived with Jesus, John stands out not for his eloquence, nor for his formal leadership, but for his spiritual sensitivity and visionary depth. It is he who leans his head on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper. It is he who remains at the foot of the cross when the others have fled. And it is also he who is the author of the most mysterious and mystical gospel among the four canonical ones. John does not just narrate facts, he penetrates the invisible, translates transcendent experiences, and understands that there are truths that can only be conveyed in silence. He not only heard Jesus' words, he listened to what was left between them. Your gospel begins with a statement that echoes the deepest mysteries of creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is not just a theological introduction, it's a cosmic key. The word word comes from the Greek logos, which means more than word. It refers to the universal reason, the creative intelligence, the primal vibration that gave rise to everything. John begins his narrative not with genealogies or prophecies, but with a metaphysical statement. Everything arose from an original vibration, and this logos manifested as flesh, as living presence in Jesus. This perception is the core of the code. The divine is not outside, it vibrates in everything. John sees beyond the form. His language is symbolic, dense, and often poetic. He does not speak of miracles, he speaks of signs. Each action of Jesus is portrayed as a living metaphor, a gesture that points to a higher reality. When Jesus turns water into wine, it is not just an extraordinary feat, but a metaphor for the transmutation of consciousness. When he heals the blind or the paralyzed, he is signaling the awakening of the dormant soul. John understood that the visible world is a veil, and behind it, a silent truth pulses, accessible only to those who see with the eyes of the Spirit. John's silence was not shyness, it was reverence. He understood that the mystery cannot be explained, only experienced. Therefore, his words carry layers, vibrations, frequencies that touch the reader more through resonance than logic. What John received from Jesus was not just teaching, it was a transmission. It wasn't a message, but a vibration. For this reason, his gospel does not have an abundance of parables. It has mystical encounters, nocturnal dialogues, symbolic acts. John understood that Jesus' true teaching was not doctrine, it was presence. The encounter between Jesus and Nicodemus, narrated only by John, is emblematic. Nicodemus was a Jewish teacher, knowledgeable of the scriptures, and he seeks Jesus at night, a sign that his search was secret, perhaps timid. Jesus speaks to him about being born again, not of the flesh, but of the Spirit. Nicodemus does not understand. He thinks in physical terms. Jesus replies, "The wind blows where it wishes, you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." This statement carries the seal of the code. The spiritual reality does not fit into logic. It is experienced, not explained. The Apocalypse, also attributed to John, further reveals his visionary nature. Much more than a book of apocalyptic predictions, it is a symbolic map of the soul's journey. The language there is of visions, archetypes, numbers, and seals. There is no linearity, there are spirals. John writes as one who has seen, not as one who has heard. He accessed realities that escape rational mind, and for this reason, he was one of the few capable of understanding Jesus' silence as language. The Apocalypse does not reveal the end of the world, it reveals the unveiling of consciousness. John understood this. In his closeness to Jesus, John represents listening. While Peter acts, John observes. While Thomas questions, John contemplates. He is the figure of the beloved disciple not because he was the favorite, but because he loved fully, without demand, without need for explanation. His love was as silent as it was firm, and it is this quietness of the heart that made him able to receive what can only be transmitted in the dimension of the unspoken. He understood that the word, when not born from inner silence, is noise, and that the true word, the logos, is the vibration that pulses at the essence of everything. John symbolizes the more contemplative aspect of the spiritual code. He reminds us that wisdom is not achieved through speech, but through deep listening. That knowledge is not in the accumulation of ideas, but in harmony with presence. His gospel is almost a song, a cosmic poem that is not read with the eyes, but with the soul. In times of an excess of words and opinions, John invites us to retreat, to pause, to introspect. He is the guardian of the illuminating silence. John's presence at the foot of the cross is another milestone that reveals his spiritual maturity. When everyone else fled, he remained, not out of physical courage, but due to the fidelity of his soul. Jesus chose him, at that moment, to take care of Mary, his mother. This gesture is more than a family concern. It is a symbolic passage of mission. John is the only one among the disciples to receive a charge directly at the moment of death. This tells us that he understood the nature of the sacrifice, not as pain, but as transmutation. He saw what others did not see, and for that, he was worthy of guarding part of the code. In the symbol of the eagle, commonly associated with John, we have another key. The eagle is the only bird capable of flying above storms. It represents spiritual vision, the ability to see from above, with perspective and serenity. John, when writing his gospel, was not concerned with reporting facts, but with offering visions. He did not narrate events to convince, but to awaken. His mission was to open portals, not physical doors, but portals of consciousness. The absence of Juon in later theological or political disputes is also revealing. He did not found churches, he did not create systems. He remained on the sidelines, a silent witness to what really happened. His silence in this case is as eloquent as his words. He did not need to assert what he knew. His writing spoke for itself. And perhaps that's why he was forgotten by many and rediscovered only by those who were seeking not a religion, but a reunion with the essence. As we contemplate the figure of John in the context of the spiritual code, we understand that he is not just a character from the past, he is a living archetype within each of us. When we silence the noise of the world, when we listen to the voice of the heart, when we stop seeking ready-made answers and open ourselves to the mystery, we are awakening the inner John. He reminds us that true knowledge is not explained, it is felt, and that the most sacred of all teachings is the one that is born from inhabited silence. We live in a world saturated with words spoken, written, shouted. We live surrounded by noise, explanations, and opinions. But there's a language that precedes all of them, a frequency that can't be recorded in books nor translated into doctrine. This language is silence, and it was through it that Jesus' deepest spiritual code was transmitted. Not with phrases nor sermons, but with presence, with gaze, with the vibration of one who has become truth. Silence is not an emptiness, it's formless fullness, and that's why the most sacred of what Jesus taught was never recorded with ink, but vibrated between the spaces of the words. Jesus knew that there are things that cannot be said without being immediately misunderstood. The highest mysteries are like sunlight. If looked at directly, they blind. It is necessary to filter, prepare, mature the soul to receive them. That's why he spoke in parables to the crowds and, in private moments, he remained silent. The scriptures are full of passages where he retreats to the desert, to the mountains, or simply remains silent in the face of accusations, expectations, even requests for miracles. These silences are not omissions, they are living teachings. He said nothing, because he was transmitting everything. This type of nonverbal communication is known in Eastern traditions as direct transmission. Zen masters, for example, pass on fundamental teachings without uttering a single word. It's the state of consciousness that is transmitted, not the intellectual content. Jesus, in his awakened nature, did exactly this. When he said, "Follow me," he wasn't just inviting physical movement. He was saying, "Enter into my vibration, feel who I am, inhabit the quiet space where God speaks without a voice," and only those who were in resonance could perceive it. Silence was also the language of the early Christian mystics. The Desert Fathers, in the 3rd and 4th centuries, understood that the true teachings of Christ could not be comprehended in squares or cathedrals. Therefore, they retreated to the wilderness, where words ceased and the soul began to listen. There, in silent cells, the first echoes of Christian meditation were born. The practice did not consist of repeating prayers mechanically, but of plunging into the abyss of one's own being, where God does not present himself as a figure, but as an ineffable presence. They knew silence is the deepest prayer. Jesus never structured a doctrinal system. He never wrote a theological work. And yet, he founded a revolution that spanned centuries. This is only possible because what he conveyed went beyond the mind. It was a spiritual vibration, a field of consciousness that expanded from his presence. By silencing, Jesus allowed the disciple to experience himself in the face of the mystery. He did not replace the seeker with ready-made answers. He led to the inner portal, and there, in silence, he waited for the disciple to awaken on his own. Silence, within the spiritual code, is the fertile ground where the seed of the word can germinate. When we talk too much, we repeat formulas. But when we deeply silence, the truth emerges on its own. Jesus knew this. Therefore, in the most crucial moments, he was silent. Before Pilate, before the Sanhedrin, before the adulterous woman, silence was his response. And each time he was silent, something was revealed. Not to the external world, but to those who were ready to feel. Even in the canonical Gospels, we find mention of this living silence. When Jesus says, "Go into your room and close the door and pray to your Father in secret," he is not just encouraging solitary prayer, he is leading to the experience of inner silence. Closing the door is metaphorical. It is silencing the noises of the mind, the incessant thoughts, the emotional noise. In this space of radical interiority, there are no rehearsed phrases. There is listening, there is surrender, and it is there that the code begins to be whispered to the soul. Silence is also the language of the Holy Spirit. On Pentecost, the disciples received tongues of fire, but before that, they were gathered in silence, in waiting, in listening. It was in this vibrational field of receptivity that the Spirit was able to manifest. The later tradition may have emphasized the visible gifts, the charisms, the sermons, but the origin was silence. The origin was surrender. And just as in the Exodus God reveals himself to Moses, not in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the gentle whisper, so too in the New Testament, the code manifests itself where it is least expected, in the gap between words. Jesus not only practiced silence, he taught how to be silent. When he says, "Do not worry about what you are to say," he is, in essence, teaching to trust in the wisdom that emerges from silence. He is guiding us beyond the discursive mind to a place where the Spirit speaks directly. This changes everything. True Christianity is not a religion of ready-made answers. It's a path of inner transformation. And this transformation begins in silence. It is in silence that fear reveals itself, that the ego screams, that the masks fall off. But it is also in silence that God approaches formlessly, that the Spirit blows without direction. Silence is the desert where the self dies and the being is born. It is the dark night of the soul where the light that has no origin ignites. It is the womb of mystery where the spiritual code germinates. And it is in this space that Jesus led his closest disciples, not through external rituals, but through inner quietude. Most people fear silence because in it there are no distractions, there are no characters, there is only who we truly are. And that's why the spiritual code couldn't be publicly transmitted, because it requires this radical inner honesty. Only silence holds the presence of the mystery. Only it can prepare the field where truth manifests itself. And this was Jesus' secret, to teach by being, rather than by saying, to be present, to purposefully be silent, and let the Spirit do the rest. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of essence. And those who learn to inhabit this space discover that they were never separated from the divine. The code that Jesus held was not a teaching hidden in concealed words, but a vibration that only silence can reveal. And this code remains alive, not in dogmas, but in the heart that quiets with reverence. Perhaps that's why he trusted John so much, because John listened with his soul. As much as the apocryphal Gospels, such as those of Thomas and Mary, shed new light on the hidden teachings of Jesus, we cannot ignore that something of the code has survived in the official Gospels. It's there, not as a clear system or an explicit doctrine, but as scattered signs, fragments encrypted in metaphors, gestures, silences, and double entendre phrases. The key to noticing them lies in changing the perspective. Stop reading as a believer or critic, and start reading as an initiate. It's in this perspective that the texts transform, and the most well-known passages reveal secrets that, until today, went unnoticed by most. We start with what seems to be the most straightforward of all: the kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. This phrase has been repeated, softened, forgotten, but it is a spiritual bomb. It contradicts any idea of future salvation, of final judgment, of a paradise as a reward. It dismantles any religion based on mediation and authority. The kingdom, that is, the full divine reality, is not in one place, nor in another time. It is within, and if it's within, it doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be remembered. This is the essence of the code, to awaken to what always has been. Another key fragment is the Sermon on the Mount, especially in the Gospel of Matthew. The first beatitude already reveals a hidden map. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. But what does it mean to be poor in spirit? It's not misery nor despair. It's the emptying of the ego. One who does not cling to identity, titles, or accumulated knowledge becomes a channel for the divine. The code teaches that fullness comes from the absence of inner resistance. What seems weak is strong. What seems empty is full. Jesus spoke in paradoxes because spiritual truth does not fit into common logic. Parables, widely regarded as stories for children or peasants, are actually initiatory devices. The parable of the sower, for example, is a map of the soul's state. The seed that falls by the wayside represents the word that does not penetrate. Among rocks, it does not take root. Among thorns, it is choked by illusions. But in good soil, the clean soul, the receptive consciousness, it bears fruit. Jesus himself says, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." This sentence is a code in itself. There are layers, and only those prepared will hear what is behind the words. Another crucial point lies in the Last Supper. Jesus, in a deeply symbolic gesture, breaks the bread and says, "Do this in memory of me." This memory is not historical remembrance. It is a spiritual activation. He is saying, when you gather in presence, in real communion, when you share not only food, but consciousness, I will be there. The body and the blood are symbols of the presence that perpetuates, not physically, but spiritually. The code lies in the conscious practice of presence, in the act of becoming the living teaching. The Transfiguration also holds secrets. Jesus ascends the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and there he is enveloped by light, accompanied by Moses and Elijah. It is a mystical experience, not a physical event. It is the representation of an expanded state of consciousness. The disciples see something that cannot be described. The presence of ancient figures shows that time and space dissolve in enlightened perception. This vision is a glimpse of the code. When the mind quiets and the heart opens, reality reveals itself in its true nature: light, unity, eternity. Even the most known prayer in the world, the Lord's Prayer, is a spiritual mantra. It's not merely a plea, It's an alignment of consciousness. Hallowed be thy name, recognizing divinity in the present. Thy kingdom come, bringing to consciousness the inner divine reality. Thy will be done. Surrender of the ego. Each line is an invitation to introspection, to vibrational realignment. The prayer doesn't ask for things, it reconnects. When understood in this way, it's not mechanical repetition, but a path to active silence, where the code can reveal itself. Jesus' healings, often seen as external miracles, also carry another layer. When he says, "Your faith has saved you," he is pointing to the individual's inner power. He does not present himself as the exclusive agent of healing, but as a mirror that reveals to the other their own power. This is one of the greatest fragments of the code, the recognition of the divine spark within each being. Jesus healed by touching, looking, being. The healing did not come from him. It emerged from the resonance he activated in the other. And this is the true alchemy. The master awakens in the other what is already there, but dormant. Even on the cross, where many see only suffering and sacrifice, there is a hidden teaching. When Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," he is revealing ignorance as the root of violence and forgiveness as the only key to liberation. There is no judgment. There is compassion for those who are blind. The code is clear. There are no enemies, only brothers who have forgotten who they are. This forgiveness is the highest frequency of love and can only be accessed by those who transcend duality. The resurrection, seen by many as a physical event, can also be interpreted as a metaphor for consciousness that transcends identification with the body and death. When Mary Magdalene sees him and he says, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father," he is indicating that something has changed. He is no longer just a man, he has become pure spirit. The resurrection is the symbol of transmutation. The code teaches that the true birth is the one that comes after the death of the ego. The new being is not born of the world, but of the spirit. These scattered fragments in the canonical Gospels are seeds, clues left by the Master for those with eyes to see. They are not absent, they are hidden in plain sight, but they only reveal themselves when the reader falls silent, listens, and allows the text to transform them. Reading becomes a mirror. What the text reveals depends on what the reader is ready to see, and that's why the code is so subtle. It doesn't impose, it invites. Perhaps the greatest mistake of tradition has been trying to systematize the mystery, creating doctrines where there was poetry, creating dogmas where there was paradox. But Jesus' spiritual code survived nonetheless, not because it was defended by institutions, but because it continues to be activated every time someone reads a passage with an open heart, with an awakened spirit, with a quiet mind. The canonical Gospels are like ancient maps. Some paths have been erased, others have been distorted. But if we listen with our soul, we will still find the secret trails that lead us to the center, to the living presence of the inner Christ. The spiritual code that Jesus transmitted to only 3 disciples was never lost. Contrary to what many believe, it did not disappear with the early Christians, nor was it extinguished by religious councils. It hid. It survived on the fringes of orthodoxy, in the deserts of silence, in the hands of mystics, and in the forbidden pages of apocryphal texts. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi manuscripts in 1945 was like the resurgence of a long-muted echo. There, in the Egyptian sands, were found gospels and treatises that carried the same vibration of the silent teaching, the awakening of the inner divine. These texts, kept outside of the biblical canon, speak of a Jesus very different from the one taught in churches. He appears as a guide of consciousness, not as a founder of religion. As a master of silence and introspection, not as a legislator. The presence of the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the hypostasis of the archons, among others, revealed an early Gnostic current that placed self-knowledge as the path to the divine. They did not deny Jesus, they understood him deeply. For these Gnostics, salvation was not a favor from God, but the fruit of an internal recognition, remembering who we truly are. But the Gnostics were persecuted, deemed heretics for challenging the emerging structure of institutionalized Christianity, They were met with violence and censorship. Their texts were destroyed, their names erased, and their teachings replaced with dogmatic interpretations. The nascent church needed uniformity and authority, and the Gnostics offered freedom and inwardness, the opposite. Still, seeds survived, and they sprouted in other fields, under other names, in other spiritual traditions that continued to carry the same code under various disguises. In the East, masters such as Lao Tzu, Buddha, and the Vedic sages shared this same inner perception of truth. They also spoke of the illusion of self, liberation through silence, and the inner light that cannot be explained. The similarity is not a coincidence, it's harmony. Spiritual truth is universal, and therefore the code of Jesus resonates with the most distant traditions. In Islamic Sufism, for example, figures like Rumi and Al-Hallaj openly spoke of the union with the divine beloved, the dissolution of the ego, the fire of inner love, and they were persecuted precisely for that. In the West, mystical currents never completely disappeared. During the Middle Ages, amidst dogmatic rigidity, Christian mystics emerged who kept the inner experience alive. Master Eckhart, in the 13th century, stated that, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me, and that God is a silence that speaks." For such words, he was almost condemned. However, his writings echo the same silent code that resonated in Thomas and John. By the 16th century, St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila described mystical experiences of union with the divine that went beyond the structures of the church. They spoke of the soul that, in silence, merges with the light. Simultaneously, more obscure currents were emerging, such as Christian Kabbalah, Hermetism, and spiritual alchemists. These seekers were not interested in power, but in wisdom. The coded language of alchemy, philosopher's stone, transmutation, inner gold, was a metaphor for the process of enlightenment. The code of Jesus manifested there as the work of becoming one, of dissolving the illusion of separation and recognizing the divine in every atom of existence. These movements used symbols and metaphors because they knew that truth cannot be imposed, only intuited. In the Renaissance and Enlightenment, the code found new transmitters. Philosophers such as Giordano Bruno, who spoke of the infinity of the universe and the divine spark in all things, were burned for challenging a limited view of God. Meanwhile, Jacob Boehme, a 17th-century German shoemaker, had profound visions and wrote about the light and darkness within the human being, about the return to divine origin through inner purification. He claimed that the true Christian was not the one who followed rules, but the one who found the living Christ within themselves. These heirs of the code, although persecuted, created lineages. They inspired movements such as the Quakers, the Rosicrucians, the Theosophists, and even modern philosophical movements that reclaimed direct contact with consciousness. In the 20th century, the code began to manifest in a new language, more universal, less religious. Krishnamurti, for example, rejected any belief system and asserted that truth is a pathless land. He spoke of the need to free oneself from all authority, including spiritual, to awaken. Eckhart Tolle, author of The Power of Now, introduced millions of readers to the idea of inner silence as a gateway to full consciousness. Without directly mentioning Jesus at many points, his language resonated with the same code, the living presence that transcends time, mind, and ego. Many felt, even without understanding, that there was a continuity of something ancient there. Tolle is one of the examples of how Jesus' spiritual code remains alive, adapted to the language of the 21st century, but intact in its essence. Today, we are living a unique moment. Spirituality is breaking away from rigid structures and rediscovering its universal core. Thousands of seekers, many without a formal religion, are accessing states of consciousness that mystics described centuries ago. Meditation, silence, presence, intuition, these practices are resurging as gateways to the sacred, and even though many do not use the name of Jesus, they are connected to the same vibrational field that he manifested. This proves that the code is not the property of one faith, it is the inheritance of the awakened soul. The internet, networks, globalized communication are creating a new type of disciple. one who searches within, who questions outwardly, who feels there is more than what has been taught. This new seeker is the modern heir of the code. He may not know the old names, but he feels the call. He may not read Gospels, but he recognizes the truth when he finds it. And it is to him that the code reveals itself, exactly as before, in silence, in visions, in experiences that cannot be explained. What if Jesus knew that his code would not be immediately understood, but would span eras, disguised, until it found fertile ground in a new humanity? What if each fragment planted in the words of Mary, John, and Thomas was meant to germinate over time, awakening at different moments, in different cultures, under different forms, but always with the same light? In that case, we are not just observers of this journey. We are part of it. We are the next guardians of the code. After traversing the veils of time, revisiting the chosen disciples, deciphering the forgotten Gospels, contemplating the silence, and recognizing the heirs throughout history, we arrive at the inevitable question: what does all this have to do with me today? The spiritual code that Jesus revealed only to 3 disciples was not a secret to create an elite. It was a map of consciousness, an internal path, a frequency of awakening, and the great revelation is this: you have access to this code now. The code does not depend on a temple, religion, status, or external approval. It is activated by the intimate choice to remember, to return to what has always been. The first practical key to activating this code lies in silence. Not empty silence, but living silence, the kind where the mind rests and the spirit listens. All the great code bearers have cultivated silence not as an escape, but as a gateway. In a world saturated with stimuli, being silent for a few minutes a day becomes a revolutionary act. Sit down, breathe, observe. When the mind screams, smile at it. When emotion tries to take control, just be present. This quiet space is where the vibration of the code manifests. It is in this space that you cease to be a thinking body and become a feeling consciousness. The second key is presence. Being fully in the now is the greatest miracle of modern spirituality. Being present is not just a practice, it is a reconnection with the living word. Jesus didn't say, "I will be" or "I was." He said, "I am." This is more than grammar, it's an ontological truth. When you rest in the presence of the now, without wishing it to be different, you begin to perceive the subtle light that pulses behind everything. The code is not activated by effort, but by surrender. It's when you stop seeking that it begins to reveal itself. The third step is self-knowledge. Looking inward with courage is an essential part of the journey. Knowing your fears, your masks, your wounds, not to judge them, but to free them. Jesus said, "The truth will set you free." But what truth? The one in the books? The truth of who you are behind the stories that the ego has built. The spiritual code is not a set of ideas. It's a change of identity, from the one who suffers to the one who observes, from the one who waits to the one who is. This transition happens within, and it starts the moment you ask yourself, "Who am I without my thoughts?" Furthermore, unconditional love is the ultimate language of the code. Not romantic love, conditional, fragmented, but the love that sees itself in everything. The love that forgives because it recognizes the ignorance behind the pain. The love that extends to others, without calculation. This is the same love that Jesus expressed when forgiving his aggressors, welcoming the excluded, remaining silent in the face of violence. This love is the vibrational field where the code blossoms, and it doesn't need grand gestures. It starts with a gentle gaze, compassionate silence, a selfless act. The code manifests more in small acts than in spectacle. To live this love, it's necessary to integrate the inner masculine and feminine, as Jesus suggested in so many enigmatic sayings. Rationality and intuition, strength and tenderness, will and surrender. When you recognize that these forces are not in conflict but in dance, you begin to experience fullness. This union is symbolized in the figures of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, John and the Word, Thomas and direct experience. The code is activated when you allow all these archetypes to blossom within you. The path does not require abandoning everything, but living with awareness in everything, eating with presence, speaking with truth, listening with depth. Each moment becomes a temple, each breath a prayer. Spirituality is not in another world. It is in this world, but seen with different eyes. The hidden gospel is being written now, in each act of attention, in each renunciation of the ego, in each yes to the unknown. This is true discipleship, living as if you already know that everything is sacred. The practice of forgiveness is another essential tool, not a forced, moralistic forgiveness, but a genuine liberation from the weight of the past. The spiritual code cannot be activated in hearts imprisoned by resentment. Forgiveness opens up space for light to circulate. It does not deny the pain, but refuses to keep it alive. Jesus not only spoke of forgiveness, he lived it in its most extreme form. When we forgive, we touch the same frequency that he inhabited, and there, the code manifests itself clearly. Meditation, mindful breathing, intuitive study of sacred texts, contemplation of nature, all these are practices that realign the inner field. The important thing is not the form, but the state it evokes. You can walk, dance, write, paint, as long as you are fully present in that moment. The code is not in a fixed ritual. It is in the depth of presence with which you do what you do. The sacred does not need a stage, it needs awareness. And the most surprising thing, the code strengthens when it is shared, not as preaching, but as vibration. When you are awakened, others feel it. They can't explain it, but something about you touches them. Perhaps it's the peace in your eyes, the firmness without rigidity, the joy without reason. You become a silent transmitter, just like Jesus was. The code spreads by resonance, not by imposition. And when two or more awakened consciousnesses meet, something happens. The field expands, and the invisible begins to act. At this point, we understand. The code was not lost. It was stored within us. It was never buried in ancient scrolls, but latent in every soul that wishes to see beyond form. The mission now is simple and grand. Activate it. There is nothing more important, because whoever activates this code transforms their life into light and their presence into healing. And it's this healing that the world needs most now. Not answers, but whole people. You don't need to believe everything you've heard so far, but if something within you felt, resonated, recognized, then the code has already begun to reveal itself. It doesn't require you to be saintly, just sincere. It doesn't demand you to know everything, just to be open. Because the spiritual code of Jesus was not given to a few to be hidden. It was entrusted to those ready to awaken. And if you've made it this far, it's because you've already heard the call. Now, all that's left to say is, here I am. Now, Mind Unfettered, it's your turn. If this code struck something within you, share it with us. What was the phrase, the part, or the insight that most ignited your inner light? Comment below, and if you want to go further, write, I activate the code in me. This isn't just a phrase, it's a manifestation. Together, we create a collective vibration that echoes far beyond this screen. Write what you felt. What did it awaken? What resonated as truth? This comment section is our digital sacred circle. Each of your words feeds this living egregore. And remember, we are not alone on this path. We are awakening together. And if you think you've seen it all, wait until you find out what's coming next. Click on the video that's popping up on your screen right now. The Brotherhood of Light, the secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased, where we're going to dive even deeper into the hidden networks that have protected this ancient wisdom for centuries. You'll discover that the code was just the beginning. Mind Unfettered, your journey is just beginning. Continue. Awaken. Manif.